the small town of Giddings, Texas, a brutal crime rocked the community and sparked a decades-long battle for justice. The murder of Stacey Stites, a 19-year-old woman, was discovered on April 23, 1996, and the investigation that followed would unfold into a complex case of wrongful conviction, racial tensions, and the quest for truth. Stacey Stites had been engaged to a man named Jimmy Fennell, a local police officer in the town of Giddings. She was found strangled and sexually assaulted, her body discarded along a remote stretch of highway. Her murder was initially mysterious, with few leads and no immediate suspects. The only major clue was the discovery of her body near the side of the road, a location that seemed to be somewhat random and distant from where she lived. Investigators were initially puzzled by the crime scene, but they did not waste time identifying Stacey's fiancé, Jimmy Fennell, as a person of interest. His connection to Stacey, and the fact that she had been found not far from his place of work, gave law enforcement reason to consider him a suspect. However, as the investigation unfolded, Fennell's story seemed to add up, and authorities continued to seek leads elsewhere. During the investigation, attention turned to a man named Rodney Reed, a 28-year-old African-American who lived in the area. Reed, a mechanic, had been in a relationship with Stacey Stites for some time before her murder. He was a well-known figure in the community and had occasionally seen Stacey. However, he had no criminal history, and there was no obvious motive for him to have killed her. Despite this, Reed's name became tied to the case when DNA evidence from the crime scene, including semen found on Stacey's body, matched Reed's DNA. Rodney Reed was arrested in 1996, and his trial soon followed. The prosecution argued that Reed had raped and murdered Stacey Stites, relying heavily on the DNA evidence. The case against him seemed strong, and after a brief trial, Reed was convicted of capital murder and sentenced to death. However, questions about Reed's conviction began to surface over the years. Critics of the case pointed out several key flaws in the prosecution's argument. First, there was no physical evidence that directly linked Reed to the crime scene beyond the DNA. Second, many experts argued that the timeline presented by the prosecution was unlikely. Stacey Stites had been found dead hours after leaving her home, but Reed had a solid alibi for the hours before her death. As years passed, new evidence began to emerge that suggested Rodney Reed may not have been guilty. A key piece of the puzzle was the fact that Stacey Stites' fiancé, Jimmy Fennell, had a history of violent behavior. In 2007, Fennell was arrested for kidnapping and assaulting a woman while he was working as a police officer. This incident raised suspicions about his involvement in Stacey's death, especially since it was later revealed that he had been in a violent, controlling relationship with her. Fennell's troubling behavior, combined with the growing doubts about the prosecution's case against Rodney Reed, led to a push for a re-examination of the case. In 2014, Reed's legal team successfully obtained new DNA testing, which pointed to the possibility that Fennell could have been involved in Stacey's murder. In fact, some experts believe that the DNA found at the scene did not match Reed's, but rather suggested the presence of another male, possibly someone closer to Stacey like her fiancé. As new evidence mounted, the case against Rodney Reed began to unravel. A number of key witnesses came forward, including those who had heard Fennell make disturbing comments about women and his relationship with Stacey. They painted a picture of a controlling and violent man who had become enraged when Stacey began to distance herself from him in the days leading up to her death. It was suggested that Fennell might have murdered Stacey in a fit of jealousy or rage. In 2015, Reed's legal team filed for a new trial, citing the new evidence that questioned his guilt. The legal battle continued to gain momentum, with various organizations advocating for Reed's release from death row. Several celebrities, activists, and lawyers became vocal in their support for Reed, arguing that he had been wrongfully convicted based on an incomplete investigation and flawed legal proceedings. In 2019, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals issued a stay of execution, granting Rodney Reed a chance for a new trial. The decision was hailed as a victory for Reed and his supporters, though the case remains ongoing. The new trial will examine all the new evidence that has surfaced over the years, including the possibility that Jimmy Fennell was involved in Stacey's death. If Fennell is found to have been involved, it would be one of the most shocking developments in the case, considering the length of time Reed had spent on death row for a crime he may not have committed. Despite the overwhelming support for Reed and the mounting evidence suggesting his innocence, the case remains unresolved. As of now, Rodney Reed remains on death row, awaiting a new trial and hoping for justice.